that you came into possession of a big set of top-quality kitchen knives like these Shuns. Are you happy? You bet you are, you lucky dog. Of course, if you don't know how to match the knife to the food or how to wield your selected blade properly, all that euphoria could dissolve into desperation. Now, since your cutting pleasure is of tantamount importance to the folks at Shun, we offer this short instructional to provide guidance for the novice and veteran alike. Now, let's begin with a little anatomy lesson. All knives, regardless of size, shape, style, or culture of origin, possess the following parts. Begin with the blade. There is the back or spine, there's the point, and of course the edge, which is composed of the tip, which flows into the belly, which segues into the heel, which turns past the return on its way into the bolster, which plunges into the handle as the tang. As for the edge itself, there are many options. It may be smooth, as you see here, or it may be serrated. I'm especially fond of these smooth scallop serrations. They're a lot easier on the food. These should not be confused with a Granton blade. This is a completely different issue. More on that later. Keep in mind that a knife is only one part of the cutting system, a system that includes the cutting board, of course, the food, the knife, your fingers, your hand, your wrist, your arm, and of course, your brain, the most important part of the system. Now, if the knife is installed improperly, that is, if your grip is bad, then the system is not going to function very well, no matter how great a knife you possess. Let's say, for instance, you decide to use the broadsword grip. Now, this is great in battle, but awkward and unstable if your combatant is, say, I don't know, a turnip. Oh, and then there's the pointing grip, which I call the rude grip, because it's not polite to point. It's also not very smart. This is popular because it gives the illusion of control. ER doctors like it because it gives them lots of business. No, for most cutting jobs in which the knife comes in contact with the board, and that, of course, is most of the time, I use the pinch. Okay? You pinch the blade between the thumb and forefinger and allow the rest of your fingers to gently wrap around the handle. This will optimize balance, control, and work angle. Now, let's talk cuts, shall we? Although variations abound, most knife moves fall into one of three categories: slicing, chopping, and paring. Now, to slice means to use a long unidirectional cut, like this. There. Yeah, I know, this is a paring knife, but the motion was a slice, and it just so happens to have produced a cut we conveniently call a slice. How ironic. Now, any knife can produce a slice, but what if I were to use this on, well, this roast beef over here? Pretty disastrous. Fine, we'll move to a larger chef-style knife, something in the 8-inch range, perhaps. Now notice I have to saw back and forth, and every time the knife is forced to change direction, the meat tears a little, and the resulting cut is uneven at best. The slicer, long enough so that you don't have to saw back and forth, thin enough so that you have reduced drag. Now, to properly slice, place the heel on top of the meat and simply draw back towards you, letting the tip go down to the board. Now, if you don't like the idea of something long and pointy flapping around in your kitchen, you can always go up to this buffet model designed with a round edge so it doesn't poke the wedding guests. It also features these Grantons, or these little scallops cut out on the side of the blade. They create air pockets, thus reducing friction. And it's got a nice weight, so it can make quick work of big beasts. If you are a carnivore, you are definitely going to want to add something like this to your arsenal. Now, let's say you want to slice through something that has a lot of bones or joints, like, I don't know, a chicken. This definitely presents some challenges with all those angles and whatnot. It means we're going to have to adapt our slicing technique, and that means adapting to a different slicer. This is a type of slicer called a carving knife, and you'll notice it has kind of an upswept point and a little bit of a kind of ditch right here in the middle of the blade. That's to help us get around bones and things. Here we go. Now, carved meat weeps, so we want to do this with as few cuts as possible. The first separates the skin at the thigh, the second goes down the keel bone, and the third takes off the... Oh, okay, 4. Well, that's still pretty good. Here's another little carving tip. If you're facing something flat, like this flank steak, don't just grab your knife and cut downward into little strips of meat. Nobody likes that. Place the knife flat on the meat, apply a little bit of down pressure, then just barely twist up into an angle and pull towards you. That way you'll get a nice wide piece. That's called cutting on the bias. Now remember, when cutting meat thin on the bias like this, don't apply pressure in the direction of the cut. Just press the blade straight down towards the board. Next up, paring. Simply put, paring refers to any cutting operation that happens up in the air and off of the board. And since we don't need the board, we don't need the pinch grip. In fact, we need a whole new grip called the choke grip. And in this one, you take these two fingers, put across the spine of the knife, wrap the others around the handle. That leaves your thumb free to feed food into the knife. And oddly enough, in paring, the edge is always facing us. And this gives us a lot of control. For instance, something simple like trimming a mushroom. Simply turn the food and the knife at the same time, applying more pressure with the thumb than with the knife. That's important. The knife is almost stable at this point. Another good example would be something like broccoli, which, by the way, I always prefer to cut with the crown facing me so that you can move with the grain of the food. I know it's counterintuitive, but believe it, cutting towards you will always give you more control than cutting away. This is bad. This is good. Now, before there were peelers, paring knives did all the peeling, and I still find that when it comes to things like scraping ginger or even peeling an apple, you're a lot better off and will have a lot more control if you use a good sharp paring knife.
Paring knives come in three basic styles. There is a standard, which is really just a miniature chef's knife, a bird's beak, which is useful for working with round items, and a sheep's foot, which has a drop point and a straight edge.
Chopping is without question the most misunderstood of all cutting methods. And I blame the word chop, which suggests that we employ this fine surgical device the way we might use well, one of these. This unfortunate association has led many a cook to approach the board thusly. Not only is this a messy proposition, it's highly inefficient, it's terrible for the knife, and it requires a lot of extra force. Force and knives will get you into stitches, and I don't mean the laughing kind. So, when you chop, don't think chop, think about a smooth orbital motion like this. Notice that the knife is in contact with the board at all times. And we're not going up and down. We're actually moving more forward and back, raising the heel of the knife on the backstroke just enough to get the food under it. Also notice that although my right hand is driving the knife, the left hand is guiding it, telling it where to go and feeding the food into it. That means that we need a knife with a relatively wide blade so it can slide up and down my fingers, safely, that is. And notice that my fingertips are curved back like this. Never chop like this. Ugh, gives me the heebies just to think about it. Now, if you're using a European-style knife, like this 10-inch chef's knife, and you can always tell a European style because the point is straight out from the handle, you're probably going to want something longish, say in the 10-inch range. If you prefer a Japanese-style knife, like, let's say this Sentoku, you can go with something that is a little bit shorter. This is about 7 inches. Just a difference in style. The cutting dynamic will be a little bit different, but it'll definitely get the job done. Sometime in your cooking career, you will encounter a recipe that asks you to fabricate a shape and size of ingredient requiring paring, slicing, and chopping. Take, for instance, the simple onion.
To disassemble this bulb, I began with a bird's beak paring knife, which is perfect for taking off both a little bit of the stem end and the root end of the onion. Just be careful you don't cut all the way through the root. You're going to need that later. Make a shallow incision longitudinally, and then use your thumb and the knife to peel off as little of the onion as possible.
Now here's where I veer off of the textbooks just a bit.
Using a chef's knife or a Sentoku in this case, make radial cuts across the entire onion, being careful not to cut through the root, and then chop through, again, down and forward. You'll have nice, uniform pieces. Producing a diced red bell pepper is also a hybrid cutting activity. After taking off both ends, open up one seam and kind of open up or unroll that pepper. I'm using a nikiri here, a Japanese vegetable knife. Pushing pressure straight down onto the board, sawing off that interior membrane. Careful, because you're having to cut towards your hand. That leaves you with the bulk of the fruit. Now, we slice that into pieces. I'm doing a slice pulling back because that way the pieces won't ride up on the knife and get in my way. That's a good thing. Once you've got those uniformly cut, stack them, turn them 90 degrees, and chop. Again, forward and down with the blade. You notice that the end of the blade is coming up off the board, but that's okay in this case.
herbs often pose a challenge for the fledgling knife master because they're so gosh darn unruly. So the next time that you have a recipe that says chop herbs, try this method instead.
Pick yourself 10 to 12 nice-looking leaves, stack them up, and then roll tightly. Place that on the board with the seam down so it doesn't unravel. Then simply use a large chef's knife to chop through. Notice that the knife is always in contact with the middle fingers of my left hand.
Now, the French call this chiffonade, but then they've got a fancy name for everything, don't they? Well, now you're on your way to cutting proficiency, and of course, a happier, more fulfilling existence. Remember, high-performance tools like Shun's, with their superior design and metallurgy, are packed with potential, but they still require the leadership that only you can provide. Take the time to develop good, safe, efficient habits, and you'll find kitchen cutting is a breeze.